What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
There's not often an opportunity for people to be able to have an interview like this with somebody who literally has a place of being one of the most important people in a person's life. And that's what Dr. Rob Pennington is for me. And I'm not just saying this lightly. I've shared in previous situations or whatever about journeys I've had about fighting with panic attacks and anxiety and high stress situations. And that's how I met Rob. And he was a counselor, somebody who's a shepherd with me along those lines. And his background is in that space. That's his home court, his home territory. And he literally has helped change the lives of literally thousands of people across the United States, as a matter of fact, globally. So, Dr. Rob, welcome today.
I'm so glad to be here, and thank you again for the opportunity to help make a difference in the people who attend and in your audience, just by sharing what's made a difference in my life.
Yeah, so I need you to tell people about the book that you wrote, because it's not to market the book, it's just because of the title.
No, let's market the book.
What's the title of it? Okay. Yeah.
Find the upside of the down times.
Yeah.
How to turn your worst experiences into your best opportunities. And every chapter is just autobiographical. So every chapter is a story of something that I experienced, the lesson I learned, and an activity the reader could do to save them the time and avoid the pain I went through to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
And it's on Amazon. And
yeah, the reason I wanted you to bring that up is that sometimes people will meet somebody who they feel is a counselor or a consultant or a leader, and they put them up kind of on a plate like this. The reason this person's good is because they don't have the problems I've got. And when I look at your story and the things that you've had to deal with in life that were difficult for mere mortals to deal with, from everything from getting shot point blank from, 8 feet away or something like that?
Oh, closer. I think that was one of the reasons why I just stuck in my sternum and didn't enter my body, as it didn't get up to speed.
Yeah, so if you literally shot point blank, you survived an IRS audit. You were married to an amazing woman that you had to shepherd through a very difficult time of her life, which was dealing with muscular sclerosis.
No, multiple sclerosis.
Multiple sclerosis.
Many scars on
or whatever
on the myelin sheath and the nerves, and it just affects everything that nerves affect.
Yeah, and so you had to shepherd her as she went through her journey of passing from this life to the next.
Yeah, we were together for about 30 years.
Yeah.
And then she passed away about 12 years ago.
Yeah, and so I wanted that at the front of this in the form of an introduction, so that people can understand that when the subject of stress comes up, that you've got a PhD not only in psychology, in life, because of the circumstances that you've had to learn how to deal with.
Well, and I still am. I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last fall, and so that's been a very important challenge. It's also brought a lot of unexpected blessings that I wasn't prepared for.
Yeah, and so since you brought that up, the point that I want people to hear is that your message and the way you're fighting this battle. When you first told me that, I was shocked. I was like, oh my God.
Sure.
And you said, well, hang on a second, Mike. I said, no, that's the survival rate's pretty small. It's like 5% or whatever. But 100% of the 5% survive.
Yeah, statistics don't apply to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone's experience is unique. But one thing that's common about all of us is we cannot control our initial reaction to anything. It's a habit. but you can learn how to recognize it quicker and move through it faster. I mean, the first week I got the diagnosis, I was, in a fetal position on my couch a lot, just body terror. But that only lasted about a week, and I've never had that again. So part of that is because I've got these tools and techniques that I've been using for decades and sharing with the world as much and as often as I can, and particularly with leaders, because we all have these habitual reactions, and to learn how to recognize them quicker, move through them faster is kind of the foundation for what I believe emotional intelligence is.
And if you look at it, that's why I think in the 40 years I've been in the business world since college, there's never been a more important time for us to have this conversation because of stress. Today, it's a different type of stress than we saw in 2020 when COVID hit in the constriction. However, it's because of the lack of clarity of path of what's in front of us, trying to move around.
That's exactly right. Before the pandemic, I think we had just this lifelong history of assuming certain things that during the pandemic became very powerful unknowns, and have continued. Our sense of the future is uncertain. These waves kept hitting. We keep thinking they're not coming, and then they come, and then they go away, and that may be our new normal. But that, and the profound effect that's had on hybrid work environment, and the profound effect that's had on how leaders manage teams. We've had so many levels of change, dramatic, huge, that most of us have, a habit of experiencing stress when change happens.
Yeah. And well, it's not a matter of if, it's people are either going into a stressful situation, okay, all right, a problem, whatever difficult time, they're in it and they're trying to deal with it, or they're coming out of it.
And if they're coming out of it, great, but they're going to go right back into it.
Because it's a cycle. And
so my insight from all my years as a psychologist, I studied 8 different personality theories and all that kind of stuff, and just too complicated. So I came up with a very simple insight, and that is your personality is made up of 2 things: the lessons you've learned and the lessons you haven't learned. And if I knew anyone well enough, I could predict how they would behave in any circumstance based on what they learned and what they hadn't learned. And stress is evidence of an unlearned lesson. If you knew how to handle it, it wouldn't be stressful. But we think when we're experiencing stress that somehow it's evidence of the unfairness of the situation, or the inappropriateness, or we shouldn't have to be dealing with this, or whatever. And how long it takes us to accept that that's the situation and choose to deal with it. So that's a simple way through a lot of stress, is choose to do what you're doing while you're doing it. If you're stuck in traffic, choose to be in traffic. If you're at the stoplight, choose to be at the stoplight.
So say that again, but say it slowly, because I want to make sure that what you said, but that is such a profound statement that I want to make sure that people take this in.
Yeah, choose to do what you're doing while you're doing it. For instance, when we knew that my wife had multiple sclerosis and all the potential fear that can come with that of all the unknowns and things, I chose to have a wife with multiple sclerosis. I chose to have the challenges that I knew may come. So stress is often resistance to change. That's my first definition. But the second definition, it's evidence of a change is needed. So sometimes you can change the world, and by golly, if you can, do. But sometimes you can't change the world. That means you get to change yourself in your belief that you can't be successful with the way the world is. And figuring out how to be successful when you don't know the hows is another source of stress, because most of us think, well, if I don't know how, then I can't. But what I've learned is I don't need to know the how to believe I can. In fact, I'm more likely to figure out the how if I believe I can.
Yeah, and so what happens is the one of the things that you taught me, and I use this a lot, Rob, is looking at a situation, right? And we have a tendency to make up stories about what's going on, and it's not what's going on. Make up stories of what the result of what's going on is going to be. Trying to
usually what's going on is not the stressful thing that's worrying us. It's what might happen because of what's going on.
So we make up this story, right? And one of the principles that I know you teach a lot of, which is looking at a situation and figuring out what's sort of the incredible opposite of what you're dealing
Well,
with.
if you think about it, every worry is about something you do not want to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we're thinking about that, we're feeling what it would feel like if that thing we don't want to have happen would happen while it's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite of what we don't want to have happen is what we do want to have happen. And there's a wonderful word for that. It's called a goal. So the opposite of every worry is a goal. And I have processes and techniques and worksheets and all that kind of stuff for learning how to flip your worry to the positive opposite possibility of a goal, and then how to hold your mind on that goal in a peaceful, relaxed, confident state where your mind will just automatically start generating possibilities. None of them are going to get you there at one shot. It's just a step from where you are in the general direction.
And it's my theme that I'm talking about 2022, 2023 is I call it moving the ball. Move the ball. And to bring reality is that you were in my office one day helping us with some communication stuff. Whenever we got a notice from our bank that they closed our line of credit because it had come time for renewal. And not only did they close the line of credit, but we'd gotten a tax refund because of some investments we made in a software company we were building. So we had some net operating losses that we could use for tax deduction. And it was a big chunk of change. And that money was going to be used for payroll. When they closed the line of credit, they pulled that tax refund, sucked in, applied to the line of credit, and shut it down. So the money we thought we had, it was gone. And I'm now freaking out.
Oh, yeah, panic. Because all you're thinking about is what would terribly possibly happen that at that moment wasn't happening.
That wasn't happening because I didn't need it now, but I was going to need it then. And so whatever. And you asked me this question. You said, so if you're going to deal with this, and you're going to look for another bank, what would you do differently? So, I'd go and deal with the bank. I could talk to the number one guy, president of the bank, and not be caught up with the minions and stuff. So how are you going to find that? So, I don't know. I just, said I'll look for local banks in the area or whatever. Said, so how would you approach them? And so
now look, I'm already have my mind on the goal of replacing this loss.
That's it.
And asking questions about what steps would be in the general direction. I don't know how to do it. I don't know the process, but I do know how to ask questions.
That's it. And what happened was I went and locked myself up in the conference room, got this is going to date me, the yellow pages, flipped it open, and I started looking for banks, local banks, and called up and tried to get through the presidents of the banks. I lined up 5 interviews, 5 meetings with them, ended up have 3 of them. Because you said, what's the most incredible opposite? Well, they would be competing for my business. I lined up the things. They started making bids. The guy that I ended up meeting with, looked at my financials, and I was waiting for it. He goes, there's a problem with these numbers. And I went, we're going to get a rejection here. He goes, you're not asking for enough. He doubled our line of credit.
So how to turn your worst experiences into your best opportunities.
Yeah.
So it was actually ended up better than the circumstance you had that you were afraid of losing.
Totally. And what happens is when we deal with stressful situations, our mind goes into protection mode.
Yes.
To try to protect us, our
Absolutely.
people. Right. And it causes us to free. And leaders, are not needed when everything is going well. Leaders are needed when you got a flat tire.
Yeah.
And somebody to be able to, is one of the things I talk about is the matter of fact, the last interview I did with Fred Call, we talked about the importance of casting a vision, building alignment, and championing execution. That's what the stages of leadership that you go through. What happens is stress gets in the middle of that. Stressful situations, uncertainty, norms, it knocks things out. And the role of a leader when the storm is rolling around, you're trying to sort of stay calm, is to bring clarity to the situation, the circumstance. And is there anything that you've learned through your career that helps leaders to bring clarity to a situation?
Gosh, there's so much, because that's such a challenge. I think leaders need to be the best model of being calm in the turbulent changes. Because if they're anxious, if they're full of their fears and worries, it's very contagious. And I think it's an important thing in Lencioni's book, 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team, where he talks about trust. But an interesting perspective, it's not about being predictable. I trust you to do what you say you're going to do. It's about being vulnerable. And for a leader to be willing to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Huge builder of trust.
Yeah. So what is that? What have you learned when a leader says, I don't know, as opposed to coming across weakness? Where does that build trust with an organization?
Well, the next step is let's figure it out. So we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to do this.
Give
So
the
I've tried.
person- Yeah.
I try to move leaders from seeing themselves as the deciders of everything for their team to the facilitators of their team, which is also good for succession planning and professional development and necessary to maintain high potentials, because they need to have a sense of influence on their leader. And, there's evidence that 79% of the people who leave a company don't leave because of the money. They'll get about the same money somewhere else. And, it's because of how they're treated, mainly not appreciated by their leader.
Yeah, it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
That middle section has to do with sense of self-worth or value.
And feeling that from, the important people in your life, because we spend more time with the people at work than we do with the people at home.
You bet.
And I think the whole pandemic thing gave people a moment to step back and ask themselves, what's important to me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why they talk about the Great Resignation. There's a fallacy that I talk about a lot, that people didn't resign to go sit on a couch. It should have been called the Great Reset.
Yeah, or transmigration. They migrated to a better workplace.
I'm from South Louisiana. I can't say transmigration.
But yeah, that's what I work a lot with leaders, is just helping them realize that their job is a lot easier than they think. For a leader who grew up where they, throughout their whole career, felt like they had to prove their competence, but now they're a VP. Mm-hmm. or it seems, and they still have this edge. I have to prove my competence. I go, no, you don't. You've already done that. Take a deep breath. Relax. Now your job is to accomplish things through others.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are times when you need to use your authority, but they're just two. When a decision's already been made, and then you, like in the 30 management principles of the U.S. Marines, I think I got a nice little background thing I can drop up here. Let me pull up this side. Yeah, here we go. Core business, 30 management principles of the U.S. Marines. So one of them is we've decided. Now let's talk about what can go wrong. Let's talk about the challenges. Let's talk about the risks. This gives people permission to disagree. That word risk, what are the risks of this decision?
Mm-hmm.
And the other end is to put the two bookends together, is after you've done this facilitation and yet the group can't come to a consensus.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a time when an authority needs to act. And when you do that, you have to do two things. You have to make sure they experience being understood about their point of view. And saying I understand doesn't do it. You got to repeat what they're saying to their satisfaction. Did I get it? Am I understanding this risk that I am suggesting we take? And you have to acknowledge the risk, meaning this is all on me, guys. I've made this decision. I'll protect you if it doesn't go right.
Mm-hmm.
And people will tolerate disagreement. This is true about human beings. Human beings tolerate a disagreement when they experience being understood. They won't tolerate not being understood.
Right.
They will leave marriages. They will leave careers.
Yeah, because what happens is, goes back into this word clarity. They're looking for clarity of value, and the first thing is, and it goes back to Stephen Covey: seek first to understand before being understood.
Yeah.
It's a strong principle that can't be said enough times, because as leaders, especially a lot of us, are wired to talk our way through situations.
Yes, let me tell you what's right.
Yeah, but then we're not wired to listen our way through situations and circumstances.
Which is the Socratic method of teaching, by the way. Socrates only asked questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you run into a disagreement with someone, usually you have no idea why they don't see what's so obvious to you.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to get around and look at what they're seeing that prevents them to see what you're seeing, and be able to leave breadcrumbs of questions from their point of view to your point of view, where they go, oh! Now, if you can't do that, that means one of two things. Either you don't know enough about their point of view, or there's something off about yours, which leads me to another important point. Leaders need more humility, which is easy to do if you just recognize you don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to know what you know, but what are the chances that people at your table, the group, the team, might possibly have an idea, even if they don't have as much experience? They might have an insight or something that you don't.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, is what if they know what you know, but you let them tell what they know instead of coming from you?
You get so many more points from that, because if you say it and then they agree, well, they'll think you didn't think they were smart enough to come up with it. Mm-hmm. So if you could say, so here's a problem, what do we come up with? And if, boy, everybody got the idea that you wanted them to get, how smart are they?
That's right.
Bravo. Let's do what you all want.
Yeah.
And you don't get that if you just tell them what you think off the top.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing you say, in a stressful situation, especially as leaders, our job, if what we're trying to do is to bring clarity to what's taking place, I have to approach it with gathering information, and creating opportunities for dialogue, not monologue.
Yes, exactly. And what gets in the way, what makes it really difficult, is most of us have a habit, whenever that we encounter a difference of opinion, of this emotional wave hitting us that causes us to forget any communication skill.
Mm.
So learning how to implement what I call the proactive stress response depends on being able to recognize the automatic stress reaction.
Yes.
Holding your breath, tensing your muscles, having self-doubt, thinking negative, getting serious is what we do 15, 20 times a day. Anytime anything or anyone isn't the way we want it to be, including ourselves.
Yeah, Rob, I got to put something in that's important. I mentioned earlier, if you're watching this, is that Rob was very helpful for me when I was dealing with anxiety attacks, panic attacks. And I'm not talking about little stuff. I'm talking about stuff that literally was shutting me down and made it difficult for me to leave my house. It's hard for me even to believe this. I drove across the bridge the other day, Rob, that between Lafayette and Baton Rouge, where I had one of my first panic attacks, and I saw
it's a very long bridge over a lot of water.
Yeah, and I saw this bridge moving, and you're the one who explained to me, says, no, the bridge wasn't moving. Your eyeballs, the muscles around your eyes were constricting, and was making your eyes do this. And I'm going, I didn't see it. But the reason I bring this up is there's something you helped me to try to get my arms around, is I could not control my first thought. I couldn't control, well, what if I...
Nobody can.
What if I had this? But you helped me to see you can control your second thought. And because what happens is we have what are called auto responses to situation circumstances. And part of it has to do with conditioning. It has to do with wiring. It has to do with difference. But there's an automatic response. And we have to recognize under stress and identify what our auto responses.
And that's why that hold your breath, tense your muscles, having self-doubt. And the interesting thing about the self-doubt, no baby is born with self-doubt. Whatever questions we have in our mind about our value and our worth are things we learned, and it's very contagious. Mm-hmm. But when we have an emotional reaction to something, another mistake in our thinking is we use the intensity of our emotion as evidence of the truth of our thinking. What is true is that if we have an emotional reaction, we are having some thought that is the reason why. If it's a negative emotion, it'll be a negative thought. If it's positive emotion, it'll be a positive thought. That's rather obvious. But learning how to recognize that connection and learning how to realize that the intensity of our emotion is not evidence of the accuracy of our thinking. That gives us the opening for humility. That gives us the opening for what we could practice more in what I would call the proactive stress response. How to breathe, how to relax, how to reassure yourself about your value and that you can when you don't know how.
Yeah, and we're running into those people who are having an intense response to a situation, circumstance, verbally, okay? You and I were involved in a conversation of this in the last couple of months, and you were sharing with me that the level of intensity somebody brings in is directly connected to the importance that they want to make sure that I understand.
Yes, if someone's upset or angry, they're telling you two things. One, what they're saying is important to them, rather obvious, but we tend not to validate the importance. So one of the things, I have these three questions to end conflict, and the first one is, I can tell this is important. What is it you want me to know? Because they're also telling you they don't think you want to hear this. They're assuming resistance on your part. It may not be personal. They may think that about everybody.
Right. But sometimes we're a catalyst to that intensity because they get intense.
Oh, and then our emotional wave hits us, right. And then we go, no, that's not true. Try to head them off at the pass. And part of the problem is if they make the decision that we don't understand, then they also decide nothing we have to say is relevant.
Yeah, we don't understand, so we don't care.
even worse, or don't love in personal relationships.
That's right. Those two things go together, don't they?
Absolutely. And a lot of times people just want to be understood. But sometimes as leaders and partners in personal relationships, we think when they're coming at us with some emotion, it's a demand for us to do something. And then we start dealing with that. When a lot of times, I can tell this is important. What do you want me to know? And then, is there anything else? And is that all? I want them to tell me that I understand, because that means they're telling themselves that I understand. That means they don't have to defend it anymore.
Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.